Armchair Preaching, a podcast of the First Presbyterian Church in Lakeland, Florida. This is a podcast about God's Word, the beauty of the gospel, and what it takes to communicate that truth to others. I'm your host, Pastor Zac McGowan, and on today's episode, Pastor John and I dive into this week's message in our series entitled Next Steps as we discuss the importance of service. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to Armchair Preaching. Back in the armchair with Pastor John. Hey, how are you doing?
Zac, it's going great. Good day. It's a good day.
It's a lot warmer than it was the last time we hit record.
Goodness. It was such a... Yeah, we were just talking about that before we hit record, how
I'm in short sleeves today. You can see if you're watching online, because I was like, I can't put a jacket on today. It was so humid today.
Yeah.
This is Florida. This is Florida winter. This is Florida February.
Yeah,
it's going to be 85
it's picture
degrees.
Perfect weather. I mean, it's perfect weather for being down here and not in Michigan in the snow or wherever. But it's sticky.
It is. It was 95% humidity this morning. When I went out and ran at 6, I run in my glasses. I run in glasses because I like to be able to see.
Fogged up, yeah.
And immediately I was like, well, these are absolutely useless. So I took them off and I was holding them the whole time. And I was like, I still can't see, but at least now I'm not,
We have a 2-car garage. My Mustang's in there. Seal's car's in there, which means my black car is out all the time. The minute I walk out, I can tell you the humidity. My car was just covered in...
We're getting
moisture.
there. It's getting there. We're getting there. But anyway, we weren't able to record last week. It's becoming a very busy season for people that don't know. They're not a part of our community. Night to Shine is this week, which is, as I think we have said on this podcast, it's the third biggest event, single night event in the church. That's right after Easter, which is probably the biggest. Well, not probably. It is the biggest Sunday that we have, and then Christmas Eve, which
probably the biggest
rivals
day. That and Easter run pretty close together.
Pretty close.
Total number of people here,
and then Gloria Christmas is right after Night to Shine. So we'll have 750 to 800 total people here on Friday night, and it'll take, as you were just talking about in staff meeting, takes over everything. I mean, the whole church, inside, outside, most of the staff is intimately involved, if not intimately involved, tangentially involved. So it takes over everything. So it's been a busy week. So
you love doing the DJ work. You've done the DJ work every year.
Every year. There? Well, so this is the 10th year for Night to Shine. 10 years that they've been doing it. We did not host the first year. We were partnered with a church on the north side of town, North Lakeland Presbyterian Church. They were hosting it. Immediately saw how huge and gigantic it was. We helped with with their gowns and their suits, and we did some of their boutique things and things like that. But we did not host it here that year. The next year, they were the actual sponsors, but we were hosting it, and there was a DJ that night because we were not really we didn't have really a lot of leadership in it. We were just really like the hosts. And we had, a lot of our elders got involved, and I don't want to throw shade at people whose job it is to be a DJ, but it was not good. Let me just put it this way: it was not good. A lot of complaints, and our contemporary worship leader at the time was helping run sound and was complaining to me about how not great it was. Oh, yeah. And I said, I said, I could do better.
Year
than that. 3,
to what is this? 10? Is this 10?
This is 10. This is 10 total. So this is my 7th year doing something musical. Of course, we had 2 years where we were doing COVID. So there was a drive-through experience, which I'm going to use air quotes for those that see it online, DJing, but there was no dancing. They were just driving around, and I was kind of representing there. It was not nearly as much fun. Yeah. And then we've been back since 2022. So 22, 23, 24, and then this is 25. So I think this is the 8th one that I've done.
Though, as much as I know you love it and you're good at it, and you're working. You're just talking to staff about how hard you're working to find, update the music, the set list and all. But sometimes I hope that you can. I love that Caleb's there, that you can let him go and you can do other things.
This year, my hope is this year that there will be a period of time where Caleb can kind of run a little segment of it, and I can kind of float and see. That's what I did the first year, was I kind of floated and seen, and
I did that the first year as well.
Yeah.
And then I was a buddy the second year.
Yeah.
And then last year, which was my third year, with Night to Shine, because again, we had pandemic. I was in the crown room, and you should
so much
you
fun,
should get into the crown room sometime,
yeah.
because let me just tell you, for those who are listening and those who are watching, they wear the crowns and tiaras all night long. They don't have them coming in.
Yeah, no.
There's actually a moment in the night where they are crowned.
Yeah.
And several
King
of
and
us
Queen
get
of the
to,
prom. Yeah.
Several of us get to say, "This is the coolest thing in the world." Every time I think about it, I get goosebumps.
Yeah.
You look at these kings and queens, and they do not hear these words in the rest of life. But they are told in that moment, the King of Heaven has made you in His image.
Oh, so good.
And just a wide range of reactions.
This year actually I might get to see some of those, because they're starting that process earlier. So the music is a little bit on autopilot at that point. And so my hope is, as they're going through, I'll get to see some of the early red carpet folks, the early crownings, and I'll get to come through there. And for those that don't know, we started talking about Night to Shine as though everybody listening knows exactly what that is. But it is a prom specifically to celebrate teenagers and adults who have special needs, 14 and up. And when they say 14 and up, they mean 14 and up. I mean, all the way up into their 70s. And that's one of the reasons that I started DJing too, was because, the first year the first couple of years they brought a DJ in, and they said, oh, it's like a prom. So he
plays high school music.
He played it like high school music, all high school music all the time. Well, you got folks that are in their 70s, and they don't want to hear Charlie XCX or Sabrina Carpenter or Chappell Roan, because they don't know who those people are, but they want to hear the Beach Boys, and they want to hear the Beatles, and so I throw it, but then trying to balance and mix all those things is a
good DJ. That's a good DJ. You got to read your room.
Yeah, you got to read the room. So, as I heard on one television show, it's like a vibe curator. That's what you're trying to do, which is not a bad description, but it is a great night. And you were in the respite, weren't you in the respite room for parents one year?
Oh yeah. The first year that I wandered around, I wandered around and saw a lot of things, but I ended up sitting with the parents. And that's also a great room,
powerful.
They get to watch through the big mirrors upstairs, but then they just get to relax.
So we food for them,
visit with them.
And here's the thing: I heard somebody say, we as a congregation, we are incredibly blessed facility-wise. We were just talking about facilities, and we were complaining about some of the ways that the facilities needs updating and refreshing, and not complaining is not the right, but just talking about
it's going to be disruptive.
But in terms of the layout and design of this congregation, this space is probably as good a space as can be. It's almost like it was designed for Night to Shine. Because we have a great red carpet area. We have a great respite room area.
The Grand Hallway is perfect for that.
And then the respite room is right there, so that they can, overlook and see, and they can see the red carpet without, disrupting the guests, because the guests want to feel some independence, but the parents want to see it, and we want them to be able to see it. So, and then places for karaoke, and we got a great driveway for the limos, and a great place. The sanctuary is a great space for registration. I mean, really, the design and the layout.
The prom is really kind of a formal event. They have the gowns and the suits on. So our space lends it. Our space can dress up and it can dress down as well.
Yeah, and we have all these. I think this is one of the things that makes our space unique. And then we'll actually get into talking about preaching. But we do have very formal space, and we have very relaxed space. So you can have a high school prom kind of feel, but then you can also have the very formal. I've seen people out in our prayer garden, taking pictures before they get registered. They bring their because we have and that time
grounds.
And in that time of day, that 5 o'clock, sunset. You've talked about this in your sermons. I have too. It's probably one of the best views.
We have the best. We have the best front lawn in all of Christendom.
Yeah. Especially at sunset. At sunset, because I've had people honk at me because as I'm leaving the church around 5:30, if the sun is setting, I'll just kind of like be dumbfounded by the view, the picture, and you take it in, and I'm like, just taking deep breaths, and then suddenly I hear, get away, I got places to be.
I'm glad you. I'm also glad you brought up the praying pruners, the people who take care of the grounds in your sermon, because they do every Tuesday. They were here. They were probably still here right now.
Yeah.
Well, and they take care. That's all volunteers.
Yeah, and that really, that really does bring us to what we were talking about both last week and this week. Last week we were really talking about taking the next step of community, being a part of the church. And then as part of participating in the community, you contribute, and Night to Shine is a great example of that. I mean, where we have a lot of folks. It is a community event as well as a church event, but it takes 450 people easily to make that night happen, and it takes 10 and a half, 11 months to make it happen well, and it takes people listening to the messages last week, listening to the message this week, and saying, yeah, as a part of my journey with Jesus Christ, as a part of my journey of faith, I'm going to serve. And we have a lot of examples. You're talking about the praying pruners. Are there other areas in this congregation specifically that you're like, man, we do this well? We have people that serve really well. Are there specific areas where you look at and go, we talk about special needs, we talk about folks that I don't think people know we have these praying pruners, but people always talk about how our grounds are so immaculate. They think that we pay for all that to happen. We do have lawn service and stuff. But
I will say this, and this is in defense of something that people mostly laugh at when they hear about Presbyterians. But the way that we organize ourselves, where groups of people come together to make decisions on committees, we have some great committee work being done. I mean, the whole work with property, the thing, you've got some projects going on right now with property. There's always something going on with property. I'm so thankful for the people who serve on those committees, serve on the finance committee. We've got just rock stars serving on those committees, worship committees, all the committees. There's so many good things. I said something in the live version this weekend about the fact that just to pull off a one worship service, I said, if you really want to get the perspective on what all it has taken in terms of people being involved, you got to back up to, I was in the sanctuary, to everything that went into December 24th, 1978, the first worship service ever held in there. They built a building. Who did that? Hundreds of people came in and built that building, and then all the people who've gone since, and then all the committee work, and all the volunteers, all the ushers, and all the greeters, and all the choir, and all the pastors, and the liturgists, and it's just if people really would unpack what any one moment, same thing is true in Vine, any one moment was like all the hours that it takes for you to develop the skill of being a preacher, Jennifer to develop the skill of being that, and then to do all the work for that particular day, and that's just two people. Multiply that times. Even on that day, custodial staff, secretarial, administrative staff. There's probably 60 people who were involved in putting off that 1 hour of a worship service. So I've said it before. And you're talking about cliches. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. Church is the largest volunteer army on the planet.
Yeah, and if you don't believe that, then go to one church, on even a small church, on a Sunday morning and see how many people it takes to make that happen. And it goes beyond just the actual worshiping service itself too. It's because we were just talking to Anna Butler. She's getting ready to is our children's ministry director, and she has a volunteer appreciation brunch coming up, and she's invited 60 people. That's and a lot of those folks come on Sunday mornings, and that includes folks that deal with the children that we have with special needs, because we, again, talk about the uniqueness of our congregation. We try to care for the folks in our community that have children, adults, teenagers with special needs, and we don't just do it one night a year. We do it every Sunday. We have Shine On and Shine On, which is the kind of the extension of Night to Shine throughout the year, has 40 or 50 adults with special needs on Wednesday night. Well, there's an additional 25 volunteers every single Wednesday that say, I'm going to be there. I'm going to sit at the table. I'm going to help them kind of, they're unpacking the Word of God at whatever level they can appreciate it and understand it and take it in. And some of them, I'm going to tell you, there's a couple folks in there, and they ask me some really tough theological questions that I appreciate, because I'm like, wow, they're being discipled in those spaces, and that's along with the 50 or so kids that we have, and the 60 or so youth that we have. And it takes an army Sunday morning. It takes an army Wednesday night. For all, and you've talked about this in your sermons in the past, for all of the shade people throw at the church, I think they throw it from places of ignorance.
I couldn't agree more.
Because what they do is it's almost like, we get upset when we hear pastors that preach sermons and they start proof texting, passages. They take a passage of sermon out of context and then they try to build a theology around. I get upset at people who try to proof text the church based on a couple of bad examples. Yeah. And there are those. I mean, don't let me give you there are true. But there are hundreds and thousands of examples.
Yeah, for every one pastor who falls and makes the news, there are 50,000 other pastors who are faithful and just
doing the best they can, showing up to be servants, and they have typically a congregation rallying around them, and they're not all large congregations. I mean, we're in a moderately sized congregation, but people show up, and they're not showing up for us, and they're not showing up for the committees. They're showing up because they feel a sense of gratitude for what Jesus Christ has done for them, and they're wanting to give back.
And that's kind of how this whole idea of the next steps. That little nugget of what you just said there has been what drives that. We're not interested in somebody taking a next step just because we want to. Just in order to fill a job.
No.
In order to get a job done. I mean, yes, it takes all. Everything we've just been saying is all true. It takes even with 60 people in that invited to that volunteer lunch, you did it on Sunday. We still call for more volunteers.
Yeah.
Because 60 is enough just to keep everybody in rotation to take care of the rising number of people there. It's not, but the first thing to say is it's not about doing this in order to just to do it. The first thing to say is that you can't be. My phrase on Sunday was a person who's not serving is defenseless.
Yeah,
there's no defense. We are called by the Son of God to be people who put our faith into action.
Yeah.
And now I didn't say anything about this, and I don't think you did either, but there are some people who hear that and they get really nervous about that because they have very limited abilities, physical abilities, they have very limited means, and they say, well, I only, and then they start with the I only statements. All I can do really is to pray steadily for my church. I had literally had that said on Sunday after the second service, and I said, yes.
Well, that
is a huge thing.
Yeah.
If a good theology of prayer would just nip at any kind of fear of that.
There's not an I can only pray.
Yeah.
It's I can pray, and that's
every bit as important.
That's every bit as important.
Teacher.
So to those folks, we would say, okay, then let us help you pray better in terms of getting on. We send out a prayer list every single week to a team of prayers who have given us that line, like I can pray, like I have, and the Bible talks about the ministry of intercession over and over again. I mean, that we believe that, like that there's power. Otherwise, we would just be a charitable organization looking for your money and looking for your time,
which is all the accusations are all the church wants, and that maybe that's it. All the church wants is my money. That's what people say.
Yeah.
All the church, they're after my money. That's not what we're after.
Yeah. We're after your heart.
We're after your heart
for the sake of Jesus Christ.
And when that's in, so many things fall into place. So many things line up, and so many things in a person's life lines up, and so many, certainly their trajectory of their life is lining up, and their destiny in life lines up as well. It's just a win-win all the way around. And does it involve asking things like we asked about this Sunday to knock down some myths or to call them to serve? Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not for the sake of that. It's for the sake of the person doing this. It's good for the person. It's good for the body of Christ, and it's good for the person who's doing the serving.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to get. We've already kind of started jumping into it a little bit, but we're going to really dive into this week's message. Talk a little bit about last week's and how I think there's some play in what we talked about last week with the community and the call to serve. I think the thing I will say about this series is you really have a hard time missing one. Because this is one of those they really do build. I feel like they really build on each other, and we're going to see that I think a little bit more as we close out this week. But let's take a break, and then we'll get right back and we'll jump into this week's message. And we are back. This is the fifth sermon, fifth week in the series, and
5 out of 6.
5 out of 6. You were just talking in the break. This is kind of an evergreen kind of series, right? And talk about that. What does that mean to you when you say something like an evergreen series? Because I think we've had a few of those over the last, since COVID. I think there's been I don't know if it's been intentional or unintentional or what, but there's been a few series that you could hold out and say, this is what it means to be a part of FPC. Yeah. So what do you mean by that?
Some of the series are book of the Bible. You do the book of the Bible and you're done. We did Jonah, for example. The first one comes to my mind. We did Jonah. You did Jonah. It's done. Now the teaching from Jonah still applies. That lingers with you. But other series like this one, the implications of this series, they'll still be just as true and just as relevant and just as front of mind on the 7th Sunday. The next, when the next series begins, it'll still be just as true. And we talk about this topic of every single person has a next step of faith to take all the time. And so what we've done with this series is we have boiled down what could be dozens of possible next steps down to 6. And say really try to simplify it. And the hope is that there's no time that a person wouldn't be able to look at their own life, because this is really also very self-reflective time. Let's look at our own spiritual life and what is it that we need in our spiritual life. And that's been fun to hear, by the way, along the way, is that I've gotten away from my quiet time. So it happened to be first of the year, which, by the way, why we're doing it. First of the year,
it's a good time to do these self-reflective time things.
They tend to be more like that. And so, but it's been fun to hear people say that, I've needed to get back to daily devotions, or I needed to get back to, or get baptized. You've had all the baptisms we've had this month. So that's an evergreen to me. It's just it has ongoing effects all the time. It never stops being impactful and never stops being part of our conversations either.
I think it also, one of the things I with an evergreen kind of series like this, it's also explains what I feel like is a kind of a tent pole sort of area of the church, of personal faith, the community, whatever. And this really answers the question, what is a disciple? In my view, as I look at this, we get asked this all the time. Our mission is to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ. Say, well, what is a disciple? Well, if you want to really know, disciple is it's not just there are internal things which this series addresses about faith, about your relationship to Jesus, but then there are also external expressions of that: daily devotion, being in a small group, being baptized, serving, and then we're going to talk about this week discipling others. So to me, I think this is one of those series that you could take the best of each part of our sermons and kind of chop them up and say, this is what we mean when we say be a disciple of Jesus Christ at FPC. You could be a disciple of Jesus Christ in other churches, and they might, as you said, there's a dozen. They might say it differently, express it differently, have different inroads and outroads, like we just talked in the first segment. There are things that are uniquely us, where if you go to another church, they may not have, and if you're feeling God's call on your heart to serve folks with special needs for the sake of the gospel, that church may not be equipped for that. We are, but there are other churches that are more equipped to handle, and we've talked about this, and I think we're getting better in some of these areas. So when I say this, but like singles ministry, we've been a little bit lacking in that. I think Tim Timmies, though, as our college young adult director, is turning the tide of that pretty radically. So that might be changing. I hate to say that we're a church that really has something for everybody, but we're getting there. I feel like a lot more. But other churches might express that differently. I feel like this series says, at FPC, this is what it means to look and feel and act like a disciple.
It'll be useful for us. And I got to tell you, I'm as excited about, I don't want to get ahead of it, but I'm as excited about this last one, because all of it, you're right, all of it is about being a disciple, but I am going to tip the hand a little bit.
Tease it up, yeah.
But the missing piece in most churches is what we'll be talking about this Sunday.
Absolutely.
And to have that on the list of 6 is, I think, a very rich expression.
And again, not to tease it too much, I think if you look at the churches in America, especially, or in the West, or probably in the East too, I hate to say I'm not as well versed about the Eastern Church or the specific congregations. I know they're huge ones, but in the West, the churches that make the greatest impacts are the ones that get these 2 steps that we're talking about now. The last 3 weeks, community, service, and then this Sunday coming up, they get those right better than and this week I think is the missing piece for most congregations.
That is something that if we were to you talk about dialing up the intensity, if we were to dial up the intensity of our ability to help people live into that, finding community, getting into small groups, finding the place of serving, and being ready and able and willing to actively seek to be a spiritual parent to someone else.
Yeah. That's next week's message. I know. But it does. But again, like I said at the beginning,
it
all ties together, and all the steps. One of the reasons I started my message this week the way I started it was to help people, because I tend to be an organic thinker. I don't like hierarchical structures. Because I don't think that's actually how organizations work. I don't think they actually work in a hierarchical structure. However, I think step-by-step instructions
you gave us sequential this weekend
highly
to build
useful.
your globe.
They're highly useful.
Yeah.
But they're also...
But we're not bound to them. You made that clear as well.
Exactly.
We're not bound to the sequence, and most people are going to have variation on it anyway. So,
and you have to go back, and you just said this, you have to go back and revisit these steps. Again, you're not getting to the end of step 1, and I put my faith in Jesus Christ and go, check, I'm good. I never have to think about my faith in Jesus Christ again. No. You should be constantly, and actually, the
same thing with baptism.
The baptism piece helps us go back to step 1 and recomprehend and not that we're rebaptized, because we talked at length. If you missed that, go back and listen to those. But every time someone else gets baptized, we're called to remember our baptism, which means remembering our salvation in Jesus. And I've heard this too. You've heard this too. The idea of the daily devotion, the personal devotion. People saying, "Oh, yes, I needed that reminder. I needed that encouragement," because they need to go back and revisit that step.
Yeah.
Or they're in that step, and we've talked about this too. Like, what happens when your devotional life feels stale? And not that it's about the emotional state of it, but
I do think that's being human.
Yeah.
Being human is we live our lives. We do our activities of life, whether that's civic activities, social activities, work, school, whatever it is. We live our lives, and those things consume energy and time and attention. And so we're going to get distracted by the things that are sort of the deeper spiritual ultimate things. And so there's this constant need to keep coming back to the basics. I think sports are the same way. You have to keep coming back to the basics,
fundamentals,
the blocking and tackling drills, so that you remember what it's all about. How to do it.
This week you and I we had 2 kind of passages. We both of us
2 ways in. We took 2 ways into this one, didn't we?
Yeah, but we both really talked about the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings 17. We talked about John 13 quite a bit, both of us. I spent some time connecting the dots to the early church because that's one of the things I've like done. That's one of the things I've done
Acts
throughout
6
this
part
series.
Especially was nice. The ones who serve.
Yeah. Well, and part of my, and I didn't say this explicitly, but it was in the background. I don't think I said this explicitly, was that all areas of service, because when you read Acts chapter 6, that part where the disciples say it's not right that we should give up the preaching of the word, it could sound like there's and I didn't. I want it, but then when you read the description of who they're supposed to call to serve the food, it's men full of the Spirit, of good reputation, and full of wisdom. It's not the best cooks, right? It's not the best. I mean, they probably had to have some skill in that, but they had to have. But it was the kind heart. So I didn't really say that a whole lot, but I wanted to show that, hey, look, the early church had to deal with the need. The need to serve is not, as you just said, we're not trying to just ask people to do things for the sake of it. We're trying to do that so that we can care for people in the name of Jesus Christ.
And it's not hierarchical.
It's not hierarchical.
As if this is the whole the equality of the gifts language from 1 Corinthians 12 is that the eye can't say to the elbow, have no need for you. If you have a gift of this and someone else has a gift of that, they're both equally valid and needed. So it's not which says that we are to understand that we have the gift. We both did the 1 Peter.
Yeah, we both did 1 Peter 4, right?
Which is that summary that says that you have a gift, use it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was we both talked about the widow of Zarephath, and I think we both treated it fairly the same, right? I mean, you talked a little bit about how the passage is typically preached, rightly so. This is not, and you said this about God's provision. I didn't really mention that, but I think we were both, and you tell me kind of where your head was at, but I felt like we were both preaching this sermon we were both preaching this sermon to kind of take the wind out of people's sails who say, I can't serve. Does that make sense? We're kind of trying to deactivate those excuses. And I actually went straight in for it.
You were more overt about it. Mine's more implicit though, but
I felt the same thing
Jesus,
too.
The widow of Zarephath, the woman with the 2 small coins, and these you can't say you can't serve.
Yeah.
Because they both did it.
Yeah, I mean, you the way you painted the picture of the widow was especially dire. I mean, she was starving to death. I mean, I think you actually used that phrase. She's starving to death, and this is her last meal.
Yeah,
I mean,
she gives it away.
And I just I could feel that sense of, well, who the heck am I? I mean, because I'm a little overscheduled. I mean, so I'm gonna have to get. And I was a little bit more shame showering people, like I have to give up a round of golf once a month so I can serve.
Both valid points, by the way. that is a valid point, and that needs to be heard as well.
Yeah, but so when you're approaching that and then tying it to the John 13 passage, were you thinking that sort of kind of getting the excuses out of the way for people?
It wasn't as overt for me. It was that. I mean, in the end, the call is that if you're not serving, serve.
Yeah.
Don't make Lauren Massetti write a country song about you. If you're not serving and not giving, you need to serve. That's the sermon.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell. So, but that implicit in that is that there's lots of excuses why people are not.
Yeah.
They're not serving.
Yeah.
Some of them we talked about a minute ago. I've done, or maybe we did it before we hit record. I've done my time. I raised my kids. I was involved in student ministries. Now that my kids are grown, I'm done with serving.
I'm retired from serving as much as I retired from my job.
How many times have you preached about that?
Absolutely.
Show me the word retirement in the Bible, and you go right ahead and retire.
I've said that. And I've heard you say it in sermons too. I've said it copious amounts of times because actually, and it
needs to be heard.
It needs to be heard, and the thing that gets me is, like, we also know people where it's the opposite, right? They retired from their jobs, and then they tell us they're busier than they have ever been because they're serving in church. I mean, they spent their life getting to a place where where they feel financially secure enough so that the 8 hours that I talked about, that I just say, hey, you know what? You want to take your 8 hours of work a week, a day, whatever, great. Factor that in. they said, no, it's not the 1,680 hours per month. I want to give part of the 8 hours. And we know people like that. I mean, we know people in this congregation that we joke, do you have an office here yet?
Yeah,
right? Do you have a cot here yet?
There are. I heard a pastor say, recognizing that truth, he say that it's actually a consultant, Stan Ott. You may know him. Mm-hmm. Stan said there are people out there who are those super volunteers. They put in. The average volunteer average good volunteer may put in 4 hours a week in serving. But these super volunteers have put in 20 hours a week.
Oh, yeah. And we know them.
30 hours a week. Yeah. And he said, those are the people you all need to consider making volunteer staff.
Yeah.
Literally give them an office, give them a phone, give them business cards.
Yeah.
And make them volunteer staff. They don't need they're not in it for the money, but they are in it because they love what they do. And I can think of 10 people right now.
A handful of them here, yeah. And some of them there are others that are just behind that, right? Like they maybe not 20 hours a week, but they're 5 to 10 hours a week, right? Do you feel, and I didn't think about this until I was talking to one of our elders right after the service, because he came up to me after the service and he was feeling especially convicted about the message, right? That he could be doing more, whatever. And he's one that does serve. He's also very busy, lawyer, family, whatever, in the community. But did you feel any sense either before, during, or after that the wrong people were going to get this? Like the people that are already serving 20 hours a week are going to be guilt-ridden that I'm not serving 25. No, I didn't. It didn't dawn on me.
Well,
the people that are going to get.
But you felt it.
I felt it after the fact. I was like, you know what? I should have addressed that. I should have addressed that. I should have said like, hey, you know what? If you're already
in the recorded service, I did not. To be like this, so you wouldn't have noticed it if it was there. It was not felt at all in that recorded service. But by the time I got to the live service, I realized I'm looking around a room full of people, and I said the line, "I know almost every one of you, and I know you're serving, so I want just to honor and honor that." So still, the call needs to go out, because not everybody is. So that was the gist of it.
Yeah, and I the way I kind of addressed it was calling out specific people who I knew were serving as just to kind of say,
well, even your list of all the places that you could serve around that room, people would have self-identified.
Yeah.
That's me right there.
I already do this, right? Yeah. And that's what I like we're talking about the guys volunteering in our Sunday morning ministry to special needs, Many Miracles. Mm-hmm. And that's just been kind of a recent development where a couple of the guys have signed up and they started volunteering. Well, our children's and special needs ministry program directors have noticed marked difference in the behavior levels because there have been men that show up. And so what Anna has said is we need more men to show up. And so I wanted to call out the men that have already stepped up and said, Kyle Merritt, Danny Rodriguez, they're doing this already, but we need more of them so they're not doing it every week.
Yeah.
Right. And because to me, that was one of those, it's like, go back to the excuse thing, like you're just talking about people saying, I did my time when I had kids. I also want to make the point that there are certain areas that we become sexist and we say, well, and I'm using that's children's ministry is woman, that's women's work.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely not. And it makes huge impact.
You be ageist in that as well. So
absolutely.
You have to be, it's for women, it's for young women.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not for old people, nor is it for men.
And just to that point, thank you, because I want to call out a couple people who have taken the opposite. They've listened to some of the other messages that we've preached about serving, and they've said, why can't we? I mean, just because our kids aren't in the children's ministry, why can't we? And so we've got the Ruthvins, Matt Ruthvin and his wife. They show up on Wednesday nights, and the Mondays.
Yeah,
they don't have kids in the ministry. They're not. Their kids are in college and postgraduate degrees, but they're like, well, we got time.
Yeah.
And so now they're signing up and they're leaving a legacy for and so. But
one of my favorite things to do is to see the older generation. With the Flanagans, they're there on every Thursday night. They check in the children for Celebrate Recovery.
Oh, great example.
Every night, every Thursday night, and they love it.
Yeah. Well, and like we've got Eloise and Jim Walls,
yeah.
and my mother-in-law, Julia. They're in their 70s. They don't have kids in the ministry, but they're hosting.
Yeah.
You know, they're welcoming the kids as they come in on Sunday mornings. But all that to say is we need more of that, because it's what God has shown us is God's blessing those areas. God is blessing those areas, and because of the faithful service of those people, well, now we're busting at the seams, and it's like the praying pruners. It's like, you know, they've been doing a great job, and now there's more things to pray and prune over, right? And so we, you know, and as the church grows,
well, and leadership is the key to it all. If the more leaders that you have, this is the limiting factor. So this is the practical part of it. Again, the whole point of this helping others, call to help others, is to live the life of faith that we're supposed to be living. So, but the practical thing is that the more leaders that any organization, any department has, the more leaders that Anna has, the more men leaders, you were just talking about that, the capacity increases.
Yeah.
The more people who want to be a part of that. So, and I think Tim Timmy's about to find this out as well. I heard the other day that he's got 8 new, now 10. I saw him on Sunday morning. He said 10 new students ready to be trained to be leaders.
Yeah.
What's going to happen was those 10 people are going to that's going to cause the whole thing to grow.
Well, and what we're seeing there too is like quite a few of the group in Tim's group, that's the college age, you know, 22 or 18 and up. I think he's like 18 to 30-ish. They're starting to, they've heard the call to serve, and Seth, because now Seth is our new youth director, student ministry director, but he was a part of Tim's group. He's saying, well, why don't y'all come and help me with students? Because what the students need, what the teenagers need, is they need to see faith continue in the next realm of life. And so now,
can I tell you, I wish I would have had that at that age.
Me too.
I did not have that at that age.
Me too, because it was always the super. I don't want to say super. They're all younger than me, but I am now. But they're all in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, being leaders, and it became like this. Well, that's.
Well, it's great, but there's a gap.
Exactly.
I'm mentally trying to find my path to get to where those people were. So I love that they were there. That was very helpful.
But you need both. You need both.
I didn't see how the next 2 years were going to play out.
Yeah, exactly.
Junior in high school.
Because in my head, and I remember so specifically thinking this before I really came to faith in Jesus at 18. I remember thinking this church thing is fine, but as soon as I get to college, I'm leaving this behind.
Yeah.
I was at 17 making plans to be, you know, one of those marginal Christians. I was making mental plans to be the Christmas and Easter guy. I mean, was what I, and then
you were,
and then well, I didn't get that far. Jesus got a hold of me before I went to school. So Jesus got a hold of me before I showed up.
I was that guy. I was that guy. Yeah.
But then I remember, like, okay, I came to faith the literally a week before I went to Florida Southern, and I went in thinking, well, I'm going to be the only one. I'm going to be the only Christian. And I'm fine. I'm going to do this on my own. But then God shows up and he lines things up and he puts me in relationships with good Christians. It's too long for this podcast, but we'll get into it. But
in the best of the prophets, am I the only one, Lord?
But you know, that's what we're seeing is people serving, and we're starting to see the generations cross. And what the point of this message this week is not that we're. And there's some areas that we're kind of desperate for more, but we're desperate for more because God is blessing us with more. And he's finding, and the question that always goes out there, and neither one of us really put it this way, only for my sake, I'm only now thinking of it this way. It's the parable of the talents in a lot of ways, right?
Whatever it is you've been given,
we've
put it to work.
I think now
seek to increase.
We've been faithful with what God has given us over the last 3 years. I think really post-COVID, we were starting to see, you know, obviously all that was weird time. But I think even there, God was making some cultivation moves. He was plowing some soil and getting things ready. And those were fairly painful times, and we saw, right? But now we're starting to see some of the harvest, and we're starting to see, and God is saying, okay, now you've been faithful with this, I'm giving you more. Are you going to be faithful with this? And then I'll give you more. And that's not you and me. We can't make that happen. We can't manufacture that. That is
No,
that's
but
God
all
work.
things do need to be in place for health.
That's right.
The thing, in order for, it's like plants. In order for a plant to be healthy, the components of that make up a plant, they all need to be healthy to some degree.
Yeah.
The plant is. I'm not going to be good to make that analogy. I have to think that one through here. But that's if it's in bad soil, if it's got diseased plant, the plant's not healthy. But we've been working hard on being healthy, looking at the health of the church.
And now it's God working in the hearts of the people to say, I can do that. I can help with that. I can help with, the senior adults. I can help with hospital visitation. So the people.
By the way, I was really glad you did the 168 hours, 168 hour talk.
168 hours a week. 16. If you take out, the funny thing is, you take out the 8 hours of sleep a night, you take out the 8 hours of work a day. There's still 1,680 hours a month. That's a lot of hours. It sounds like a lot of hours.
But we give it to something.
You
give it lots of other things.
That's why I wanted to put the Joshua.
It's a prioritization. That's anytime you have that conversation about the relative amount of free hours versus volunteer hours, it's a question of prioritization, and people vote with their feet.
Yeah. Well, and also too, I think people, and this I didn't address this in the mythical reason number 2 of I don't have the time. I think people feel as though things take more time than they do. Right? I mean, they say, well, I'm going to volunteer in children's ministry, and that's, there's 25 hours a month. I'm like, well, it could be. I mean, if you're one of those like super volunteers that we talked about, but it could be 2 hours a month, 3 hours a month.
I put Randy Gilbert had told me that there were 8. Did I say it?
You did. You said it. Yeah,
there were 8.
Ushers.
There were 8 ushers. So I said that. That's so easy.
Yeah.
That's it's occasionally serving on a team.
Yeah.
You can get your family to do it with you. So that's so easy. I don't know if I haven't checked any
to
response cards, see if anybody calls in yet. But
well, I usually find that there's a delay, right? So I mean, I would love to say that we had like a gigantic upswing,
slain in the spirit, and off they cut.
That's not how Presbyterians work. We're very. If the church is a methodical, if our congregation as a Presbyterian church is a methodical organization, which we are, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that helps us avoid, to some extent, bad decisions. It also makes us a little slower to get to good decisions, but that's it's a trade-off. The people are also methodical, but it's what we've seen is over the course of time, and because you and I do hit this fairly regularly about the importance of service, people show up. They hear it enough times, and they hear it enough times, and they're like, well, maybe they'll stop talking about it if we sign up and do something. And we're not going to stop talking about it.
Our mutual friend Norm Hatter, he with that great deep voice that Norm has, he said, we were not called to sit.
That's right.
We were called to serve. So that's the sum of this message. We're called to serve.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to see how we can unpack this in your small group and in your devotional life. I think this is going to be a pretty easy way to do. I think we probably wouldn't have to do the third section. People could invent the questions pretty easily, but we're going to do it anyway. So let's take a short break, and we'll be right back in just a moment. And we're back in the third and final segment of this week's podcast, talking about serving in your own life, talking about serving with other people. Where would you go with this, Pastor John?
I wrote down what you said as we were just finishing up the last segment. So you're in a small group, right?
Yeah.
In a small group setting. So the first thing you do in small group is say, okay, you decide. You decide what the questions are.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not that, it's pretty straightforward. The questions were hanging out there the entire time.
They're all
you
there.
decide what the questions are. And they would be, categorically, I would want to think about, I'm reminded of like spiritual gifts and natural abilities. I'm reminded of the Purpose Driven Life Church, Pastor Rick Warren,
Saddleback,
and their church, Saddleback Church in California. They had this profile for someone who's new to the church. They call it the shape profile.
Shape profile.
So it's spiritual gifts. Where's your heart? What's your aptitudes? What's your personality? And what are your experiences?
Yeah.
So you put all those, and they had you answer questions in each one of those areas, which meant that you needed to do an assessment of your spiritual gifts.
It was a fairly robust assessment too, I will tell you.
But at the end of it all, because sometimes I've done this. I've done spiritual gifts assessments. And at the end of it all, we said it was like reading a self-help survey in a magazine.
Yeah.
So I know some things about me, but what do I do with it?
What do you do with it?
And it was a really great way of saying this is what we can do with it. It'd be good for you for a group to talk about. If you know your spiritual gifts, what are they?
Yeah.
If you don't know your spiritual gifts, talk about spiritual gifts.
Yeah. And I'd even say to people, like, it might be a fun group project to find a spiritual gift survey that fits because I mentioned this in the sermon. I have a love-hate relationship with spiritual gift surveys. I like the shape survey because it does factor in things beyond an individual's perceived gifting. And I'll say that very clearly because you can manipulate spiritual gift surveys pretty easily if you are at all attuned to what the questions are asking. So I've known people who, I'm not going to call any names out. They're not in this church, but they swore up and down they had the gift of teaching. They swore up and the problem is nobody wanted to listen to them, and that was so the experience side of that was really important to say, well, what has been your experience? So say you got to the end of this and you said that you were a good teacher because you like to teach, but your experience shows that you don't really have sustained classes for very long.
You're not a leader if you don't have followers.
That's
You're
right.
not a teacher if you don't have students.
That's right. So maybe you're not a teacher, but maybe you are a curriculum writer. Maybe you are a teaching assistant. Maybe you have the heart for theology, which is awesome, and the church needs that. But maybe you're not the person who's actually delivering the mail. I think that
would be a good conversation though for a group to have, well, for an individual to have as well. Is that what am I?
Yeah.
What is my makeup? What am I good at? Like you said, am I the person who writes the curriculum, but I'm just gonna be terrible up front with the curriculum, or the opposite, or am I an evangelist? Am I a helper? Am I what am I? Where's the world's needs and my passion?
Yeah.
Where do they intersect?
That's such a good way to phrase that. And I think in a group setting, especially if the group is small enough, if you're in a larger group, it's harder to do these. We can break things up. But if you're in a group, and especially if you've been in a group with the same kind of people for a while, so they actually know you, you might even have a fun time to say, well, what do y'all think is my gifting? Like what? Like maybe it's not even a gifting. Maybe it's like, well, what do you think my personality would be useful for?
Mm-hmm.
Because every personality across the whole spectrum, and this is one of the reasons I talked about not only the 1 Peter 4, but then I listed the other, the Romans 12 and the 1 Corinthians 12, those is because there's so many different things listed in the Bible, and those are not exhaustive lists.
No, I've got 22, a count of 22 spiritual gifts, and that's the first thing I say after I've named them, the 22. It's not exhaustive.
These are representative. I always think of them as representative, not exhaustive. But like asking, it's like when you and I became pastors. We became pastors not simply because we said we felt the call to be a pastor. There were other people who said, yes, we see that calling in you, right? And we have a very extensive ordination process for that reason. And that's how it's supposed to be. That's why last week's message and this week's message tie in so well together, because it's the community helping each other be the very best followers of Jesus Christ we can be together. And
which is why I think it would be a fruitful conversation to have in a group.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, okay, here's what I think it is, but what do you think?
Yeah. And if you're not in a group and you take one of those shape surveys or spiritual gift surveys, then come talk to somebody. Get in a group, come talk to one of us, come talk to Josh Schweitzer, come talk to, if you feel like it's children's ministry, Anna Butler or Seth, or, because maybe you're gifting, you have a heart. This is where the shape survey is so powerful. Maybe you have a heart for children, but you want to help with children, but
lots of ways to serve with children's ministry.
But maybe your experience and your expertise are in technology, Well, there's some intersection points that aren't sitting down and drawing, coloring with kids, but we've got musical things that like my son, for example, he helps with the tech in the children's ministry. He helps run the music and the slides and everything that they need on Sunday mornings. That's tech and children. You talk about that intersection point. That's tech and children intersecting. And typically people that are good at tech don't often think they'd be good in a children's ministry. And then children's ministry always tells me we need help in these technical areas. And we have a VBS thing where it's several technical areas. So anyway, those are some examples where in conversation, you can discover things that you never thought were
Here's something else
possible before.
With this whole discussion of what your natural abilities are, your heart, your experiences, your spiritual gifts, people who have been in the church and been working and been super involved in the church talk about getting worn out.
Yeah.
Burned out is better said. They get some people will get burned out, and one of the great ways that you can really battle that is to do this kind of a thinking together, thinking it through. What is the thing that I'm really passionate about?
Yeah.
And if you're really if you're passionate about it, you can still get tired, but there's a whole lot.
It's a lot easier.
Lot less likelihood of you burning out when you're doing the thing that you love.
Well, one of the things that you hit in your message, which I really didn't, and I after I heard your message, I was like, man, I really should have hit this. I should have hit this harder. Is the blessing for the person serving?
Mm.
And you said this. It's not for the blessing that we serve, but the blessing is promised. I mean, Jesus talks about the reward constantly, right? And so if you're living into your gifting and into your heart and into your passions and into your personality and into your experience, you're going to feel the spiritual lightness of that much more quickly. Whereas you're not going to feel it as much if you're outside of your gifting.
There's Stephen Ministry folks, which is a parachurch organization that trains people in caregiving ministry, also did a course on spiritual gifts. I don't know if you've done that one or not, but one of the stories they tell in that I think is illustrative of what you're just saying, and it's the story of the thousandth carburetor.
Mm-hmm.
There's a carburetor in Ford Corporation. There was the thousandth one off the line, and they pulled that one off the line, and they boxed it up, framed it up, and put it on the vice president of engineering's desk because that's a sign of progress. And then that vice president came and went, and that carburetor went to a storage closet, and it went to the basement, and finally went out to the junk, and somebody picked it up and took it to a junkyard.
Oh, wow.
And a guy with a Mustang years later comes looking for a carburetor, finds the carburetor, cleans it up, puts it on the car, fires up the car, and the carburetor, this is the parable, the carburetor was in heaven.
Yeah.
It was finally doing what it was made to do.
Yeah.
It was hot and fire was burning through there and gas was pumping in there and it was loud and all this, but it was just made for that.
Yeah.
And that's I think about that.
Yeah.
A fair amount is that when I'm doing what I really love to do, as hard as it is sometimes to be in the roles that you and I have, as hard as it is sometimes when I'm in doing that, I'm loving it.
And the opposite's true too. There are some folks we talked about this, some of the super volunteers, they just love volunteering. They don't care where it's at.
Yeah.
They're the deacon type people. They want to do whatever it takes to get, and so they're in that. They're in the trenches. But then there are others, they jump in, and you and I both have cautionary tale examples of people who jump in and they get in the wrong spot and they go wholeheartedly into it with a great passion. And a heart for the Lord is there, but it's not what they were built for. And it's not what they ultimately.
And there may be seasons where that has to be the
sometimes
case.
That has to be the case. And we have to do that too. I mean, we do things.
Just because it's not our thing doesn't mean we don't do it.
I mean, great example is my previous church. I was for 10, 11 years, I was the contemporary worship leader. Not for a season, I loved doing it, but it was outside my gifting. I mean, I could get people to worship, but it was definitely not like the carburetor. the engine wasn't firing on all cylinders because I didn't have all the cylinders. I was like a 2-cylinder worship leader asked to fire 8 cylinders, and I just didn't have that. I was a 8-cylinder preacher. I was an 8-cylinder teacher, a 8-cylinder organizer, but as a 2-cylinder worship leader. So when I came here, and that was not a need, but it was a need there.
Yeah.
And
so you did it. Yeah.
And
just going to be just because you don't have this, maybe the spiritual gift of evangelism is not yours. If somebody comes up and doesn't know Christ and wants to talk to someone, and you're the only one around,
you should be prepared.
It's step up.
Yeah, you should be prepared.
Swing away.
Yeah, and so it was funny when I came here and I set that down, and don't get me wrong, for people hearing this, I know there are folks from my former church who still follow me, still listen to sermons, and in the time I was doing it, I loved it. And because I saw God fill in the gaps for me, right? But I definitely felt God fill in the gaps. Right? I knew every week I had to fill in the gaps. And not that God doesn't fill in the gaps here for us when we're preaching. We've talked about that ad nauseum, right? Yeah. But when I got here, some folks from my former church came and visited me, and they saw, and you could see it here if you come to my office, I got a guitar and sitting there because I still play on occasion just for fun. Somebody asked me, so, you get to play, in the band or whatever. I said, no, I haven't picked it up in a year.
Yeah.
And they looked at me like I had 4 heads. And I was like, well, no, that wasn't, I was always punching above my weight there, right? I was always punching above my weight, and God filled in the gap, which that was awesome in another way to see that. But I also, towards the end of my ministry there, I was burning out of that. Yeah. I was burning out of that because and to your point, other people had started coming to the church who were much more gifted musicians, much more gifted, and I felt more and more like the need for me to be doing that was less and less, and so I started handing that off.
The summary of that is that you did it, because it needed to be done.
Needed to be done, yeah.
But God honored that.
Yeah.
God does honor that when you're being faithful, even though that's not the thing that you are really uniquely gifted for.
Yeah.
Not that you're not gifted for it, but somebody else, like you said, is more gifted for it. God honored it and allowed that season to come and then to go with other people stepping up to do this. So,
and I'll tell you this.
We must be. I guess all of us must be in that sort of mindset. Is that I may not like it.
Yeah.
I mean, this may not be my calling. It may not be the thing that I may not be the carburetor on the engine right now. I may be the carburetor on the shelf right now, but I need to be in this role right now.
Yeah, until
God will honor that.
Yeah, and God will bring somebody along at just the right time to fill the gap when it needs to be done. And I think I would ask in a group, when have they been on both sides of that equation in service?
Good.
Or in working, or even in their work life. When have you been on both sides of that where you've been the carburetor in the engine doing exactly what you were called to do, and how did that feel? And then when have there been times when you were doing things that were really a bit outside of your gifting? And if it was in a church, did you find God filling in those gaps? And what was that like? And then were you able to put it down? Or maybe they're doing that right now. Maybe they're in a season where they feel like they've got to fill a gap at FPC, because we do have gaps and needs that have to be met by people who
somebody
that have to be met by somebody. So
I'll throw out one more topic.
Yeah,
it just occurred to me as you were saying that.
Yeah.
When do I retire from ministry?
Yeah.
Ask that question in the group.
Yeah.
When are you to retire from ministry?
Yeah. And what would that even look? I mean, how would you even make the excuse?
So I had a guy named Chuck and Ken. These two guys. Ken was probably at the time 88 years old, and Chuck was probably 93 years old. And these guys were they're like Judy, a younger. They were the older version of Judy.
Judy Bowles.
Judy Bowles.
Yeah, I knew you were talking about because
just nonstop, just always in. And they were sitting across the desk in my office, my last church, and they said, well, you need to ask the people to do this. And I said, Chuck and Ken, I said, I feel like when I do that, like let's say you two do it. I said, but I feel like when I do that, I'm yelling at my grandmother.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right to yell at my grandmother. And both of them said, look at us.
Yeah.
look what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then they went down, they listed off 15 other people in the church who were stayed active in the church. He said, you're calling them to do what we have found meaningful to do, that they need to keep doing, because you don't retire, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So in the future, when I did it, in the future I said, Ken and Chuck have given me permission to say what I'm about to say.
Pass the buck.
And they're 92 and 88 years old, and say, if you're sitting on the sidelines now, there's no excuse.
Well, and it just, I think that, to me, that's where you see the scripture enacted in people's lives, and we can quote scripture and then point to how it's being lived out in other people, and then saying, go and it's like what Paul said. It's like, go and do likewise.
Yeah, go and do likewise.
Yeah, it's like Paul. Paul said, imitate me. Right.
Generous with the earlier conversation.
Yeah.
Some people are going to hear this. Well, I can't.
Yeah.
Physically, I can't. Great, you can do something though.
Well, and especially in this age of technology, I mean, people say I can't do X, Y, or Z. It was like, okay, can you pick up the phone,
make a phone call,
because
write a card,
I'll tell you, you
speak
and
a
I,
word of encouragement, bake some food.
How encouraging is it when you call somebody from our congregation who you're just checking in on? They had surgery, they're home, whatever. And then they say, "Oh yeah, well this person already came by, and this person and especially when you hear of somebody who is a homebound person who picked up the phone and called. They couldn't come and bring a cake or a meal, but they found something that they could do, and that to me is like, yes, that's it. There's not a I can only do this. No. Whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Yeah. And if it's pray to the glory of God for the good of the church. If it's making a phone call, or in this day and age, if it's sending a text message, if you get it on your heart to communicate encouraging words to somebody, follow through with that. You have no idea what that impact is going to be eternally for them. Yeah. And no matter what, we should all be in the stage of encouraging each other, like the Hebrews writer says, to love and good works. So if you see people serving in an area of the church, go and say thank you. If you're serving in one area of the church and you see other people serving in another area of the church, just give them, them some words of encouragement. Give them, say thank you for. It's a good way to get to know people too. But just saying thank you for helping with children's ministry. Thank you for doing it, because that speaks volumes to them about the community.
And a lot of people think those thoughts,
and they don't do anything with them.
But they never get them out into words. That'll bother them. I don't want to interrupt them right now.
And I've had those thoughts too. And I, in my better moments, I will
ignore that.
I'll ignore it and say, you know what? People always love hearing thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, so I may not pick up the phone, but I might send a quick text message. I had just an example yesterday, and this is not tooting my own horn, but I had the thought of, we had a small group leader here that is and I'll call her out, Kim Bowers. She's doing gangbusters. I mean, she has no children in our children's ministry, no youth in our youth ministry. She teaches our 3rd grade Bible program 20 years in a row, and is a small group leader for middle school girls, 7th and 8th grade girls, and
just started the women's.
It just
started the women's grow group too, right?
Started the women's grow group. And I'm going to tell you right now, and I felt this. For whatever reason, I was sitting down yesterday. I was working on something, and I feel like Kim needs some encouragement. I don't know why. Just was like, and sometimes in my worst moments, I'll ignore it. Oh, I got too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
In this moment, I said, no, I'm just going to text her, because I know personally kids in her small group who have said to me, that saves my life, that group. Like, it saves my life. Like, her text message, Kim's texting her small group girls just prayers and words of encouragement throughout the week. And they look forward to Wednesdays because of what God is doing through her and her assistants and Jennifer Campbell and Jamie Blitch and Jason Rada and all the others that are doing that same thing. That is a ministry that everybody can do, just those words of encouragement, right? Those words of thanks and gratitude. And like you said, we always have those kind of impulses and don't always act on them, but that can be a service to people too.
Oh yeah. So there's no the answer to the question that you raised in the small group is there is no retirement.
There's no retirement. There's no retirement.
And there's always something.
Yeah. But there might be a shifting in what your service is, right? You and I both know, folks in this congregation who used to be missionaries on the field. Now they live in Westminster assisted living, and yet they still find ways to serve, and they feel guilty that they can't do more. But I'm like, you're doing it, right?
You're doing it. Yeah.
You're just shifting to a new brand new area of life of service. So anyway, we could keep talking about that. So I think you can tell we get excited about it because people
I love we're not. There's no shame.
No,
this is not about shame. This is about really God has hardwired us this way for a reason. He's hardwired the community this way for a reason. Because it does feel like sometimes that we're hitting it heavy, and it could be heavy-handed. It could be perceived as heavy-handed. I feel that way. I didn't feel that way for either of these, but sometimes it feels like I'm talking to Ken and Chuck, like I'm being heavy-handed here, telling my grandmother to get on with it. Pick up, go mop the floors. But the call is important. The call to do that, because that's what makes our community better, what makes the individual better. That's what needs to be heard.
And as it's important to point this out, it's following our Savior's lead.
Yeah.
Who came not to be served, but to serve, got out a basin and a towel, wrapped it around his waist, and washed his disciples' feet. And he says, as I have done, go and do likewise. I've set you an example that you should follow. It does make the community stronger. It is a blessing for us as individuals when we serve. But if for no other reason, if you say you follow Jesus, you got to actually follow him. You actually got to follow his example. And that's where sometimes it can be heavy-handed, and rightly so, because it's like, look, you're not going to outgive Jesus. You're not going to outserve Jesus.
And to be fair, sometimes we will say it in a non-heavy-handed way, but the person who is feeling some guilt and discomfort about that is going to feel it in a very heavy-handed way. And I'm okay with that.
That's okay. That's
Holy Spirit.
Yeah, we call it that Holy Spirit conviction, not guilt at that point, right?
That's it.
Anyway, if you missed any one of these messages or any of the messages in this series, make sure you go to our website, fpclakeland.org, to the worship page in the Sermon Archive tab. You can also find us on the Church Center app. If you download the Church Center app from your App Store, Google Play Store, Apple App Store, search for First Presbyterian Church, and it's in Lakeland, Florida, not Lakeland, Georgia, or Lakeland anyplace else. You can connect with us, follow the prompts there. The sermon button is right there on the homepage. And wherever you are listening to this podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification icon, no matter what the podcasting platform is, so you can be notified when a new episode drops. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button there and the bell icon so that you can be notified whenever we go live on Sunday mornings, when we post new concert videos, when we post new Bible studies, or when we post Armchair preaching video as well.
And Pat, definitely share. There's the more people who are sharing, the more people who are liking the especially on YouTube. The more the message goes out. That's it's a win-win.
We are on YouTube. I noticed we are rapidly moving towards 1,000 subscribers, which
there's a change.
There's a change. There are shifts that happen at various levels. At the 100 level, you get to have your own YouTube domain name. So early on, we did not have 100, and then we got to 100, and suddenly we could be youtube.com/FPC Lakeland, which before it was youtube.com/ a bunch of tons of things. Harder to find that way. And then 1,000, I'm not sure what happens, but there is a shift in what happens, and I think you can reorganize. Anyway, it makes it easier to find. So if you haven't hit subscribe, it does not just help you, but helps others find what God is doing.
Everybody just subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Pastor John, for hanging out once again. And as always, we'll see everybody next time.